Why are we here? What are we doing? I think that for us it's just natural to come. There's a bunch of pretty guitars, we're musicians, we're guitar players, let's come see what's happening. I think some of the goals that we'd like to kind of accomplish today are to demystify a few things for you. We have a lot of different shaped guitars, we have a lot of different wood combinations. We'd like you to leave today with a little knowledge kind of in your back pocket. So we're going to go through some of that with a little brief history about the way we got to where we are today. You want to touch on the company history a little bit, Mike?
It's pretty much the golden age of Taylor at this point. You know, it's a beautiful relationship between Bob Taylor, who handles all R&D, manufacturing, he's always tinkering. And on the other side of the coin, you've got Kurt Lustig, who's in charge of sales and marketing. And they have this meld where they can't really override each other. So they've worked harmoniously for the last 38 years together to build this empire, essentially. It started in 1974. We simply celebrated our 38th anniversary on Monday of this last week. I can say confidently now that we have built and sold in the last year more guitars than any other guitar maker on the planet. So Taylor Guitars is now the #1 acoustic guitar maker anywhere else. So they're at the factory every day. We've worked ourselves from a small factory out of Lemon Grove, California. We're now into a 7-building facility in El Cajon, which is just outside of San Diego. And from one spot you can actually see all the buildings, but there's about 450 employees working there, everything from baby tailors to one-off customs. We have about 250 or so employees in Tecate, Mexico, and we have about 50 plus employees servicing a warranty center and a repair shop in the Netherlands. So now we're covering with that sales team the majority of Europe as well. So Taylor has kind of branched its wings into a global operation.
So let's talk about the body shapes of the guitars that we have and that we build as Taylor guitars. And I like to go kind of chronologically throughout the history. I call it a brief, mostly accurate history of the modern acoustic guitar body shape. So in the beginning there was the dreadnought, as we like to say. We're talking modern acoustic guitars, think bigger than parlor style guitars. Back in 1916, the Martin Guitar Company, who we love and appreciate, we're big fans of ourselves, was commissioned to build a bigger body guitar than was normally seen by a company called the Oscar Ditson Company. And they were a retail store, music store. They wanted a bigger guitar. They were based in New York and Boston. So what they came up with was the dreadnought. I'm gonna hold that up and give that to Marc. So the dreadnought was big, and it was named after a warship called the Dreadnought. And what it is, it's really the step forward for the acoustic guitar to become an instrument that could keep up with mandolins and banjos and these ladder instruments. And eventually they got to a bracing pattern that withstood the steel strings that were starting to become popular in Hawaiian style guitars. And over the next course of about 15 years from that time period, it was a varying success. It came and gone and did fairly well. But it really saved Martin through some tough times in the Great Depression. It was a big seller for them.
I was gonna say, there's two things I want to add to this. First and foremost is that when you look at a dreadnought shape, it's probably the guitar that we started listening to guitar on, or the guitar we started playing on for the very first time. And when you look at the actual shape of it, it almost looks like a square. Now here's a great secret for you. The more mid-range that you really want to force out of an acoustic instrument, the more tapered the waist needs to become. So when you think about the applications for that dreadnought, bluegrass players specifically love it because it has that real powerful low end and that real top end sizzle, but that mid-range is kind of naturally scooped away. In bluegrass situations, what lives in mid-range? Vocals, banjo, mandolin, fiddle. So everything kind of had its own sonic space, but you didn't lose any power from the guitar. The second thing is that as Marc is doing these demonstrations, I just want to make sure that you realize that we're going to do some very basic chords and chordal patterns. You know, you've seen Marc and his talents, but this is a situation where we're trying to keep this as organic as possible. So it's not the flashy guitar approach. We want to use the C, the G, and the D chords so that you have a basis for what the guitar is completely capable of.
So he's going to play this, and what we're going to do as we go through these body shapes is we're going to try and use, to the best of what we have with us, the same tone woods. And all these guitars are going to have rosewood back and sides with spruce tops. So that'll be a good reference. You can hear the shape and not so much the wood between the 2, 3, 4 models.
All right, so starting with the dreadnought, something I want to point out is that we're not plugging the guitars in. We're often, people want to hear the ES system, which we'll talk about later. But the most organic way to hear an acoustic guitar is with just a microphone here. And basically we'll just do it through that organic way with the microphone, no ES system for now, and that way we'll do the guitars.
So you get a lot of power out of that guitar, you get a lot of volume, and that's what a lot of us probably think of when you think of acoustic guitar music, especially in the United States. Country guitar players jumped onto dreadnought guitars early on, and I like to point to a spot in the late 1950s. The Kingston Trio released a song, their version of a classic called Tom Dooley, and it spiked guitar sales in the United States. In fact, the big three companies at the time, Martin, Guild, Gibson, had trouble keeping up, so you had the rise of these other overseas builders, and then you had also this groundswell of luthiers, including Bob Taylor, who started saying, I can do that. And Bob Taylor was 16 years old in woodshop doing it, which blows my mind. But that was happening all around the country. And when Bob started out, the dreadnought was kind of the starting point, because that's what we've been building in this country for so long. So in the late 70s and early 80s, not really high times for acoustic guitar music. If you look back what was going on, disco was happening, killing acoustic music. It wasn't great, but there was this awesome ground surge of fingerstyle players. And Bob was in talks with some of them, and I think he was aware of the music, and I think he liked the music. And there was a need for a smaller body guitar that somebody who was playing fingerstyle could play in a more intimate fashion, where you could move the top of the guitar, because we talk about the top of the guitar as the soundboard and where a lot of the sound of the guitar comes from. And I like to say that if you looked at a guitar like a swimming pool, you can make the waves of a swimming pool easier in a smaller pool. If you have a little kiddie wading pool, you can make waves real simply, but if you have a big pool, it takes a lot more people or power to get the waves going up. It's kind of the same with the guitar. So there was a need for a smaller guitar, and in 1983, Taylor launched the Grand Concert, which is a much smaller body guitar. I mean, you hold it up next to a dreadnought, smaller, and it's also shallower. And our Grand Concerts are also a shorter scale length. So what this does is it gives you a smaller, more intimate instrument, shorter scale length. A lot of guys like that because they can get the crazy chords going a little easier. And what you have is my favorite body style personally, because it's a great couch guitar. But what you have is something that really can fit into a sonic landscape in a different way than a dreadnought. You don't have the big boomy overtones. You have this real kind of focused, almost pretty, crystalline sound that's very balanced in the Taylor model. So let's hear the Grand Concert a little bit.
One thing I want to point out is if I go into any kind of fingerstyle work, I'll play something really light touch. What's great about the Grand Concert is the minimal amount of effort it takes with your right hand to get the top excited. In fact, it's almost counterintuitive, but if I were to play with the exact same energy on a Grand Symphony or a dreadnought, this guitar will actually be louder with less energy because it gets the top moving, kind of like I was talking about the swimming pool. So here I'll play something real mellow, and you'll just notice how the guitar just has a very intimate feel to it. I'm barely touching the strings right now. Yeah, you can still dig in.
We have some nicknames for our body styles that we like to throw out there, and this one we like to call the secret weapon, because one of the other great advantages to having a smaller body guitar is when you're recording, oftentimes you don't want all the low-end rumble of a larger guitar to come into that microphone when you're recording, so a Grand Concert can be a great guitar to do recording with. Also, if you're on stage in a band with lots of other guitar players, the Grand Concert sits in a nice pocket tonally so that you don't have a lot of stuff moving around and you sound guys won't turn you down as often. So it's kind of the secret weapon. It really does a lot of different things very well.
And when he's talking about, a band and having placement with, its own sonic space, if you're a single, recording artist, guitar player, and you're listening to yourself in headphones, you would want all of those frequencies from the low bass, strident mid-range to that top-end sizzle, and your voice fitting in somewhere. So the whole sonic picture is between your ears. But when you're having a multi-piece band situation, there has to be an order for where low, middle, and high range frequency instruments are going to live. Otherwise, you've got a guitar that's now sitting in front where they're going to chop the low end off your guitar. Now you're not even getting the whole story.
So we survived through the 80s. And what happened at the end of the 80s that really kind of kick-started the acoustic boom again for us was MTV bringing out the Unplugged series. And we can point to specifically the Eric Clapton Unplugged show, then album, which really, it's never slowed down since, I like to say, because that just, everybody said, wow, you can play Layla like that? Who knew?
It's his most popular record.
Yeah, I mean, it turned everything upside down on its head, and the acoustic guitar boom happened. So Taylor was growing as a company. We were, expanding. They were building the new facility, and I think Bob was probably laying in bed at night a little contemplative. I think he was thinking, I have this Dreadnought, I have a grand concert, and we were building, a jumbo at the time. But isn't there a guitar that could kind of do both? Couldn't we split the difference between a Dreadnought and a grand concert? Couldn't we build a guitar that could keep up in a bluegrass jam, but could also be, played fingerstyle and played quietly? And there's got to be some middle ground. So in 1994, at the company's 20th anniversary, we brought out what kind of came to be, I think, the modern shape of the acoustic guitar, and that's the Grand Auditorium. The Grand Auditorium, really, if you look at it, it has the same width across as the Dreadnought. You want to grab the Dreadnought? If you look at these two guitars and bang them into each other, you'll see that the bottom bout's the same width. But what we did is we tucked the waist in a little bit, and how Mike was talking about how that can affect the mid-range quality of the guitar, it really does. It changes it, gives it a more balanced, even feel. Same depth, but definitely tucked in waist, a little more intimate up on top, but can keep right up. So 65, roughly, % of the guitars we sell every year are Grand Auditoriums. Most times I think when people think of Taylor guitars, this is the body shape that they're thinking of.
And I'll make mention of that. I got asked on the road several months ago. They said, "Hey, Mike, what is Taylor's iconic guitar? What is the D28 of your line?" And I always would be perplexed, and I realized we've never sat on anything long enough to not make it better. And we ended up coming up with an iconic shape. Moreover, the Grand Auditorium.
Yeah, so you'll hear that when Marc plays this, he can do a lot of different things, and we nicknamed this one the Swiss Army knife because it is just completely versatile.
Easy to finger pick, but also do chords.
Great place to start. If you're up here on the stage and you're playing guitars and you don't know which one, you have no idea, going to a Grand Auditorium is a great place to be, specifically the 814C. That's kind of the spot. So.
Playing the Zeppelin piece usually.
And yeah, play some Zeppelin, we like that. So that's how we ran for a long time, and we did very well, and that really blew the company up. We became a major force. I would say we became the live choice of many performers. You can turn on television and see a Taylor guitar on stage, which was great. We had a lot of feedback, and we're a company that does like to innovate, like Mike was saying, and we like to accommodate. We like to listen to what's said and kind of go forth with those ideas and see what we can do. And in 2006, Bob had heard a lot of people say, well, I love my Grand Auditorium, it's great, it's awesome, I just wish it was a little bit more. Well, what? More what? So more low end? Yeah. A little more volume? Yes. A little more just kind of everything it already was. And we accomplished that. We brought out a new body shape in 2006 called the Grand Symphony. And so the Grand Symphony, I sometimes have to run up and look at the tag inside the guitar to tell the two apart because they're just not that different. About a 1/4 inch difference in the lower bout, a little wider here. And then we took the waistline and moved it up a bit. So what that does is it gives you more area on top of the guitar, so you can create more volume. Your volume ceiling, which I like to describe as how much your guitar will keep up with you when you dig in, where it kind of maxes out, goes up a little bit here. So it is a bigger guitar, so maybe the fingerstyle guys might have to work a little harder. It can be done, but definitely what we like to call this one the big, bold strummer. So let's hear the difference. Let's go back to the Grand Auditorium for a second, and let's hear the Grand Symphony and see if you can hear the difference.
Okay.
Grand Symphonies really took off as a great guitar for the singer-songwriter. I was in Hawaii traveling, and there was a girl, beautiful voice, playing in like a coffee shop outside with an 816, and it was the perfect guitar for her because she's by herself, and it does fill up more of that sonic space. So that's kind of, I think, the way a lot of people are leaning now when they're going to buy one guitar and they plan on singing and playing. Grand Symphony's a great body shape for that.
One of the things that we have really noticed is that we haven't been selling guitars and building guitars long enough to where we have the ability to sell on legacy. You know, you'll hear us tonight use a lot of words like Gibson and Fender and Martin, and these are familiar brands to us because they've, spanned generations. But while we're not building and selling guitars on legacy, what we are doing really well is we're building and selling guitars on innovation. And our open door policy is very simple. Rising tides raise all ships. And for us, that means that we welcome a lot of the bigger players into our home. And we show them the materials that we get and how we harvest ethically, sustainably, legally. How we actually create the robotics and the machines and the tools that we use to create everything that you guys get a chance to see and play. So for us, it's homegrown from the inside out. We're never really sitting around on anything long enough before we get itchy and go, how do we make this better? How do we understand all the feedback and the styles and the interests of players and create that next better guitar? Because Bob will be the first to tell you that an acoustic instrument out of our shop, it's only about 94% perfect. These things still want to be trees, So how do we tame that beast? And in the end, as great guitar companies just start one-upping each other in quality and in performance and tone, the player and the collector in the end are the ultimate winner. And we're trying to achieve that 100% ultimate instrument with an organic material. So that's always going to be our lifelong goal.
So we're going to jump into the woods that we use to build these guitars out of right now. We like to say there's three aspects of creating your tone off of an acoustic guitar. We like to talk about the body shape being tone part number one. Talk about the wood right now, and then we like to say the bone tone, which is your hands. And please know that a lot of what we say is kind of general comments and observations about wood or body shape. You may pick up a grand auditorium that you feel sounds differently than how we described it. Everyone is different. Mike said it best. This wood started out as a tree. It's a natural thing that moves around. So please take some of the things with a grain of salt and really seek out the truth for yourself and find your own favorite guitar.
Find your fit.
So most of the time, people walk into a guitar studio and they see all these cool looking woods and the swirling of the grains and the colors, and they go, wow, that's pretty. And that's exactly what it's for, because if you notice, a lot of the excitement on acoustic instruments is on the back. Moreover, where electric guitars, a lot of that excitement is on the front. So it's safe to say still that people like to acquire things with beats, right? You visually fall in love with it and you go, that is so pretty, it has to sound great. It may be completely wrong for what you do. A lot of times you get home and you get your guitar. This is perfect. Everybody, this is what you guys are really doing with your guitar. That's what I do. It's like your TV remote. You just kind of point in one general direction. It has a general purpose. But as you start kind of understanding what different timbre can do, complementing the body shapes that we've just talked about, all of a sudden you start kind of penciling in certain guitar sounds with things that are more appropriate for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the body shapes the same now, but we're going to start mixing and matching different tonal combinations. And anytime that we ever start with something new and exciting, whether it's a new bracing pattern, a new body shape, maybe we're working on a new exotic timbre, we always start with what we consider to be our gold standard as a company. That would be mahogany for the back and sides. That's going to be Western red cedar on the top. Western red cedar is one of those tone woods that grows in the United States. There aren't too many. A lot of that exotic stuff that we just go googly eyes over tends to grow around the continent, around the globe because of just the conditions there. But the reason we like mahogany cedar is because if you have bass on one side and you've got treble on the other, mahogany cedar sits right here in the center. It has a nice, comfortable curve of mid-range, a nice bell curve, if you will. It's great for folks who just like that classic acoustic sound. Somebody who's doing dual acoustic instrumentations, or a singer-songwriter that doesn't sound like Tom Waits. So what you're going to notice is that this will be our center point. It'll allow us to take away and add to as we move through some of the different tones. on an acoustic guitar sounded like, that's probably what you would say. It's expectable. Now, the next series up is our 600 series. It's been some of the most popular we've ever actually done. It's big leaf maple, another one of that North American timbers. It grows natural. This color would be white or natural, and you can see how flamed it is. The higher the flame, people usually get a little bit more in love with it. Now, maple has some very interesting things happening with it, but people fall in love with it immediately because of how responsive it is. You touch it, it just kind of sings. But it's very dense, and that means it's inherently going to be extremely bright. It's great for women. Women have tighter vocal cords than men do. Their voices are higher pitched than men's. If you're not married, you don't know what I mean. I took my wife to a roadshow not too long ago. She didn't laugh at that joke. It's great for singer-songwriters who are doing a lot of studio work, or if you're a worship leader, perhaps you're in a rock band or a country band where you've got all this extremely loud instrumentation going on. The maple has real lack of sustain, so it sits right out here in front. You get a quick decay, and you're on to the next note. But what you're going to notice is if we have bass on one side, and we've got treble on the other, we have mahogany cedar in the center, maple grabs all this top end register. So you're going to hear a real sparkle out of this thing. Now, typically at this point, when I would do a roadshow for, say, 50 people, there's a few more than 50 people in here, I'd say, who likes the first guitar better? Let me see if I can see it. Who actually likes the sound of the first guitar better? All right, who likes the sound of the second guitar better? All right, we're about down the middle. Cool. So, set.
I didn't realize there was people out there. I thought this was rehearsal.
It's like cue the crickets.
Yeah, can't see it.
Yeah, it's hard to see you guys. This is kind of the part where I would say we really need to kind of understand what an acoustic guitar is doing. Not just a Taylor, but in general, any manufacturer. Nate kind of touched on it earlier where the majority of what you're hearing is the top. We're going to drill it even closer and say 90%. So 90% is this piece of wood that's waving. It's actually moving in every direction, up, down, left to right, side to side. And the sound hole on acoustic guitars exists so that the guitar can breathe. Think about when you breathe in, breathe out. There's one thing you cannot do, and that's speak at the same time. So when I'm actually playing the guitar, what I feel is this hum against my chest. But what's really happening is as the guitar is being strummed, the guitar is breathing in and out. And as it breathes out, the guitar pushes air away from itself. As it breathes in, the guitar actually moves air into the cavity, allows it to flex. Cedar, which is the first guitar we heard, and now the guitar you're about to hear, is super soft. Totally dynamic, doesn't need a lot of energy to get it going. Great for fingerstyle players or somebody who doesn't have a really heavy strumming pad. We're going to pair it with Indian rosewood. And Indian rosewood, a lot of folks tend to gravitate towards because, remember, bass, treble, mahogany cedar in the middle, maple gets the top end, rosewood gathers the whole picture. It's the whole enchilada. Nice low-end chocolatey bass, nice strident mid-range punch. You're always going to have that top end sizzle from a Taylor. Notice the volume increase on this guitar. Beautiful. Situation. That's what I'm kind of alluding to where it's going to start to fall out of its own sonic space, where the maple will be able to sit right in front of a four-piece group. That rosewood on that guitar is really going to start to sound muddy. And the bass player is going to be like, man, can you turn that down a little bit so I can actually join this group? So it starts to yield itself to the more single solo player or dual vocalist with higher pitched ranges. We're going to come right back to it with the Sitka spruce top. Now the Sitka spruce and Indian rosewood combination, I tell you guys, is probably the most popular combination that's on the planet. It's the most traditional, and it's probably the most abundant. What you'll notice is that when you have cedar, which is really soft, really dynamic, really sparkly, the spruce kind of rolls in a little bit of that creaminess to it in the mid-range. You'll notice that spark will kind of roll back a little bit, but the power from the low end is still going to be there. This, to me, is the loudest Taylor you can buy. And for the last guitar, this is something that I try to romance a little bit because, you know, when I'm working with folks one-on-one, or even a smaller group, I would always look somebody in the eye and I would say, one of the most romantic things that you can ever actually acquire is an acoustic guitar. Because think about how many things actually get into your personal space. You have to hold the instrument against your body. You have to feel how it reacts and how you guys are compatible. We would always tell you that you could walk onto any Ford lot in the United States and you could buy a black truck. I know the black truck in Downers Grove is going to look like the same black truck in San Diego as it is in Wells, Maine. But when you come to a guitar store, you come to an event like this, and there's a guitar that finds you, that's when real magic can happen. Because meeting the instrument is part of the whole relationship and part of the muse. So I would tell somebody that the difference between something good and something great in this world is the story that goes along with it. And everybody has a guitar, or a baseball mitt, or a lucky coin, or something in their life that's truly special to them. And when it comes to guitars, you'll meet players all over the place that say, I had to play 7 of these things to find the one. And the one has characteristics of something that you already own, and you're looking for similar traits in your new acquisition. The story for us is koa. Now, koa is a tone wood that we've helped pioneer. It's Bob's favorite. It's absolutely his favorite. And the story is this. It has to be naturally down. It has to grow above 5,000 feet in elevation to actually figure like this. It has to come from private property. Almost all koa in the world comes from the Big Island of Hawaii. You spend about $250,000 on every log, and you buy it completely blind. That would be like buying a $45 loaf of bread, and every slice in that loaf looked different. You'd probably put it back and buy English muffins. Now with koa, it has a really interesting sonic approach. We've talked about bass. We've talked about treble. We had mahogany cedar. We've had the whole rosewood picture. Maple lives right up here in the top end. Well, so does koa on the day you buy it. And as you play it in and age it, it starts to gather all this wonderful low end. And where people's ears are usually trained to mahogany cedar or, spruce and rosewood, koa kind of grabs you from behind. It has this really sticky, low mid-range that people go, wow, that is very nice sounding and very unusual for what I'm used to.
What's interesting that I found when I first heard the story of koa myself was the fact that you buy something blind, right? You can't look at it. You're going to write $250,000 check, and you have no idea what's inside there. So my first question was, had Taylor ever been burned on a log? Gone through all that hassle. And sure enough, I guess there have been 1 or 2 logs that came back. I guess there was some dry rot or whatever. And So essentially somebody had asked us, if you get a bad log, do you guys, how would we know about it? And if you guys ever want to know if Taylor gets a bad koa log, if you walk into Tobias, there's a pile of new ukuleles. We probably got burned. It's a fair way to say that. But what's interesting about that is that showcases a really valid point, and that is that Taylor was green before green was ever really a concept. I mean, they've always recycled their scraps and made the most out of every piece, even building their mahogany necks in a way they can get 3 necks out of 1 block as opposed to just 1. So it's a really neat company in being so forward-thinking and so ahead of their time.
If you guys were in love with that koa guitar that Mike was playing, you were too late. It's been sold. So I'm sorry. I want to touch on something real quick that's one of the most awesome things about Taylor guitars is a lot of places have their custom shops and whatnot, and we do too. And we have ours set up as a build-to-order program so that you can sit down with your friends at Tobias and you can design, within certain specs, your own guitar. And there's some wood options available in our build-to-order program that we don't build standard production guitars with, because those woods are either really expensive or very rare, or most of the time both. Right now, I just want to show you one really beautiful example. This is grafted walnut. And grafted walnut's actually 2 species of walnut trees that have been kind of grafted together to the benefit of the species. But we just think it's pretty, so we use it for guitars. This has, I believe, are we saying Coca-Cola binding?
Yep.
Coca-Cola binding, a special headstock inlay. There's really an unlimited amount of options you can do. You can do different nut widths, scale lengths, all sorts of different things. We can even put your initials on it if you want.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah, it's harder to
It
sell.
kills the resale of the guitar.
Kills the resale. But it is a pretty neat thing, and
Who's Jed?
exactly.
Sorry, Jed.
So the BTO program is really, really cool. There's some great, anything up here that says custom, that's been done through a build order program. Also, we have some specialty guitars. We build 12 strings, we build 12 fret guitars, which we'd love to have you come up and play after the show. But also we build some baritone guitars, which are tuned in the same intervals across as a standard guitar, except that they're 2.5 steps down. So you have a low B instead of a low E. So it's really, really neat, and I think it's a great way to show off a specialty guitar that maybe you're sitting out there saying, yeah, I have this, I have that. You probably don't have this, and this is an 8-string baritone, which is even more unique because you have octave strings on the 2 center strings. So we're gonna let Marc play this, and it shows off our amazing ES expression system also, so you can kind of hear what our guitars sound like plugged into the back and amplified.
So right now I'm plugged directly into the PA. And something to point out is that the scale length on the baritone is going to be a little bit longer at 27 inches. So from the nut to the saddle, 27 inches, about 1.5 inches longer than a Grand Auditorium or Grand Symphony. And to best showcase how it's tuned in relative tune to itself, meaning that all the intervals are the same as standard tuning, which means your normal chord shapes are going to be fine. But if I were to bar a major bar chord on the 5th fret, that's a standard tuned guitar. As I walk down to E flat, D, D flat, C, ultimately down to B.
It's the lurch model.
Down to B.
I own the very first one we ever made. It's one of those things where I say play a D chord and you go, okay, Mike, I can do that. I say, okay, sing Blackbird. Okay, I can do that. And then when you pick up a baritone, what it is for a player, it's a new muse. You can go back to the catalog of songs that you already know, and now you're in a whole different key, in a whole different timbre of voice, and a whole different experience. And for me, it was one of those scenarios where it was just, when I acquired it, it was just full of songs. You know, a lot of times everybody gets their 6th string and you get home and you know those same 10 tunes that you're playing, and it's like, well, how come I keep reaching this plateau? And sometimes it isn't necessarily the player, but it's the player's ears. So when you get to a point where you're experiencing a baritone, which has now moved to a top 10 bestseller for us, which is insane, because it's the ultimate other guitar. You know, there's so many other guitars people probably want to get before that. But variety is the spice of life, and that's why we think it really deserves to live. So.
And how many times have you showed up to a gig and they're like, hey man, can you play the theme to Jaws? Hasn't happened to you? She always has to play this. There you go.
Thank you, Marc. Yeah, he deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, there you go. All right.